Okay, so Ellis was really trying to change the way that people think and act because that was causing the issues. So it's really powerful to realize that with CBT that we can learn to think in a different way, and then we can learn to behave in a different way and then overcome these issues. So if we're trying to overcome smoking and I feel like I need to have a cigarette after I eat dinner, well, I can learn that I really don't need to. I'm not going to die if I don't have it, and it'll be okay. And I can start to behave in a different way. Maybe I need to chew gum to overcome that. So we learn a different way to overcome what the issue was. Humanistic theory says that it's going to help people to focus on reaching their potential. That you need a goal because the goal helps you to see where you're at and give you that awareness and give you conscious thought. So Rogers was the mastermind behind client-centered therapy. He really believed that just because two people come in with the same issue, it doesn't mean that they are approached the same. They're different people. Even if you have two males who come in for the same problem, they didn't come from the same exact background. They didn't have the same raising, whatever it is. He realizes we're different people, so he approaches it differently than a one-size-fits-all. And so that's really helpful. The non-directive therapy, where is the therapist does not give advice or provide interpretations, but really helps that client focus on their own conflict and identity conflict and understand their feelings. So you would actively listen. They may restate what the client said or even clarify how the client said it, but no advice is given. So they're reflecting on what they're saying and doing, and then maybe even hearing it come back from the therapist, and then they make their decisions of what they're going to do. And he really focused on unconditional positive regard, which is essentially unconditional love, that the therapist does not judge clients and accepts who they are. So I don't love you because you made an A and not like you because you made a D. I love you or care for you as a student, no matter what your grade is, but it's not performance based. And so that's what he's looking for there. And he really says that you have to be genuine, empathetic, and accepting toward clients because that's how you were going to help them. You couldn't help them reach personal growth by telling them they were falling short. So Rogers was pretty powerful. He had come through after behaviorism where it was just a kind of an input output and everybody just was unobservable things and you weren't an individual. So he was really helpful in finding people, figure out who they were, encourage self-exploration and self-expression, and really just aimed to meet the people where they were. He was very big on empathy and genuineness. Cognitive behavioral therapy, again, your thoughts, those feelings, and those behaviors, how we think, what we feel, what affects what we do, and then the behaviors of how we think and we do impacts us. We have different treatments or modalities for treatment. You can do individual therapy where you just go in one-on-one with a therapist. It can usually last anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. Confidential. You can kind of work through whatever aspect it is that you want to talk about or work on goals, anything. Group therapy is really awesome because you can meet with people who have a common issue and realize you're not alone and you're not the only one struggling with this, and then you get support through it. So think of like AA or NA or even Weight Watchers or something like that where you're all having the same issue and you're trying to overcome that. Now, it decreases that shame and that isolation. When we have an issue we don't want to talk about in front of other people, it causes a lot of shame and we isolate ourselves. You could be uncomfortable here because you're not going to have as much confidentiality as you would with the one-on-one therapy, but sometimes it's really comfortable to share with strangers. Other times it may be uncomfortable. The other benefit is that it's cheaper. It's more economically cheaper because you're paying for a slot rather than an individual's entire hour. Family therapy is really healthy too, to have the whole family going, kind of getting on the same page. If one has an issue, really everybody's getting together. Really everybody's impacted. Individuals with schizophrenia really benefit from family therapy because they can't function on their own and they need the whole family to be all together and able to help focus on all of this. So systems approach, the family is viewed as an organized system, and each individual is a contributor to all of that and that process, and that is what's influencing everyone. And so you all learn to work together as a cohesive unit, and that can help. So if you have someone who's an alcoholic, that problem is impacting everybody. And so if we can all work together, we can hold each other accountable. We can see how this is impacting everybody and not just the alcoholic. Structural family therapy is going to look at the boundaries and the structure of the family to help resolve issues, and then also learn to communicate effectively. Communicating is really hard, and a lot of people didn't grow up learning how to communicate properly or to tell how they felt, or some did, and that can be harmful for others because they didn't ever express how they felt, and then others do. So in my relationship, when I have an issue, I try to communicate a lot. And so I'll go and I'll tell my husband, and he thinks that I think he's the scum of the earth and that he's just this horrible person because I'm telling him what my issue is with our relationship. And in his mind, if you're speaking it, that means you've thought about it 100 times and you've dealt with it on the inside. When how I am, really it kind of hit me and I'm talking to you about it. So it can be hard when we don't understand each other's communication styles. So maybe if we could get some therapy to learn how to effectively communicate, it can resolve some issues. And then you have the strategic family therapy, which is going to address specific problems within that family so that it can be dealt with, but really in a short amount of time. This isn't something that would go on for a long time. And then couples therapy too. If you're managing one relationship, it's still two people. And so you need people to go in and work on this. And some people will do therapy for their marriage one-on-one. Some people will do it together. So it just kind of what works for you. And the other spouse won't go. And that's okay. You can still go to marriage therapy alone. It'll impact you and help you. We talked about a lot of these advantages of group therapy. They are really more economical. It also helps if we can draw on somebody else's experience, realize that we're not alone and that it's not maybe the end of the world what we're dealing with, that someone has overcome it, and get some ideas of how to do that. So it can provide hope, and then it does help with social skills. Social skills are not something that we always have. We have to maintain them, work on them, and keep them going. Especially if you think of COVID, when we were all separated for so long, coming back in, the social skills really suffered. Even my own, I could tell, and I stayed pretty social throughout all of COVID, but I still felt like my social skills were lacking. And it's only been up until recently that I felt more comfortable with my social skills. And they weren't poor before, but it just, if we're not using them, we lose them. So addiction is something too that we look at. We've talked about this before, but you remember relapse. It's where we return to something that we were doing, and all of us have addiction, and all of us experience relapse. When we think of addiction, we only think of those suffering from drugs and alcohol, but some of us are addicted to food. Some of us are addicted to TV. Some of us are addicted to drama, whatever it is. There can be something, and I know it sounds silly, but we all have some addiction, and we don't ever get over it in a straight path. Okay. We have relapse. How many people, they're starting their diet on Monday, even though it's Tuesday, they're starting next Monday because they've already messed up. We don't always get it right. So it's important to realize that. Remember, comorbidity is when we're experiencing two or more mental disorders at a time. And so individuals who are struggling with addiction to drugs or alcohol typically have an additional disorder. So substance users are twice as likely to have a mood disorder, anxiety disorder. Remember back to the chapter over consciousness and drugs and alcohol, and how each aspect of that, your brain is being distorted and changed by the chemicals you're putting in, and they're impacting your neurotransmitters. So that can cause mood or anxiety disorders. And sometimes that's why we started using, is because we had a psychiatric disorder. So there's just lots of different issues that are happening. And so it is important to realize that. So what ways to treat your substance-related disorders or issues? Have a goal. Try to get into long-term. It's really more effective, and it is cheaper to do therapy than it is to be incarcerated. Behavior therapy is really helpful, working with these, helping them deal with cravings and how to prevent relapse. You can use medication, but obviously medication isn't your first choice, because then we can become addicted to Suboxone, methadone, whatever that is. So they're helpful there, but then again, they can cause issues. So what makes treatment effective? The duration, usually 3 months is needed. It takes so long. It only takes 21 days to make a habit, but it takes us so much longer to break the habit. So holistic treatment addresses multiple needs, not just that drug addiction, but looking at the whole aspect of it, working with stress management, communication, relationship, parenting. There's so many things that go into why somebody started using, that if we can kind of look at the whole rather than one thing, that helps. Group therapy, we know AA and NA are really help us to realize what we struggle with, where our weaknesses are, where our strengths are, and keep us accountable. And then having a parental involvement can help with teenage substance use. We just need support, no matter who it is, whether we're a parent or a child, anything. Social cultural model says that your behavior and your symptoms are the context of your culture and your background. And so you have to realize that and you have to work with it. So cultural competence is that those professionals that are helping you need to be able to understand race, culture, ethnicity, so that they can meet the needs. For instance, when I was teaching little kids, and I would have to discipline a child who was Hispanic, I would talk to them and they would put their head down. Well, I knew that that was being respectful. Whereas my child, whenever I'm trying to correct him, when he puts his head down, he's being disrespectful. And so I have to know what the difference is between those cultures so that I can properly address them. So multicultural counseling and therapy is really helpful because you see the impact of the culture and the social norms. So you aim to find goals that are consistent with that life experience and the cultural values. I can't tell those children they have to look me in the eye when that goes against their culture. So I have to realize that and work with that, and maybe even explain to them, Caucasians think you're being disrespectful, whereas Hispanics think you're being respectful. And so maybe they need to learn both cultures. So we find ways to intertwine that culture with that therapy and try to balance that individualism and the collectivism within their diagnosis and the treatment. There are barriers to treatment insurance. I mean, unfortunately, it's all a business. So Oklahoma has better support for mental health than Texas. Insurance is going to be better. Some are better or worse. Transportation, if you don't have a car, especially in this area, it's really hard to make it to those appointments. One of the beautiful things that came out of COVID is our telehealth. So now we don't actually physically have to go to a facility to meet with somebody. We can meet from them on our phone or whatever. And so that can really help a lot. But there still can be a barrier with transportation and time. Sometimes we just don't have enough time to fit it in, or it's time consuming, it's costly, all of these things. So it's really important to realize that there are still barriers, but hopefully we can prioritize that treatment. Maybe even a language barrier. Unfortunately, there is a stigma to mental health still, and we're working really hard to overcome it. But there still is a stigma. If I came out and told you I had schizophrenia, you might react a little bit differently. If someone's telling you they're bipolar or something, there's nothing wrong with them. They didn't choose the disorder. It's just something they're working through. But we have these stigmas that we have to overcome. And it's getting better and better every day, but we still see some issues with this stigma. Also, there's the fear of not being understood. So because there's the cultural barrier, that can be problematic, or even family privacy can be an issue. Some cultures are really private, like in the Japanese culture, they're much more private than Americans, and so that can be a barrier. A lack of education on mental illness, and so maybe there's not a deep understanding of that culture, or maybe they revere it differently, and so that could be some of the issues that are being faced.